In this video, we're going to be going over the processing instructions for Df96 provided by Cinestill. This is a PDF file, and you should download it and print it out and have a copy on hand in your darkroom at all times. Additionally, even if you're a seasoned photographer, I recommend reading this 2-page PDF and really sort of understanding the differences to a monobath development. It's a little different than your traditional film processing style, and it's important if you're looking for the best possible negative to follow this 2-page PDF as closely as possible. So there are two parts of the PDF that I look at the most. The first is this second section here, agitation instructions and agitation methods. And the first thing that I always look at, though, is on the second page where it says film rating chart for Df96. And it has basically here an awful lot of the films that are currently in production, and it tells you how to process the different films for normal development, pull development, and push development. And it gives you a lot of good information. So if I'm going to go out for the afternoon with a box of ADOX Silvermax loaded up, I know by reading this that for normal development, it should be rated at an exposure index of 80 or 100. I can push it to 125 or 200, and I can pull it to 25 or 50. What's nice about this chart is it allows you to dial in your film right off the bat. So while you're out shooting with the film, when you come home to process it, you're going to get optimum negatives, depending upon the type of development that you want to do. So that brings me back to the first page, where we look at agitation instructions and agitation methods. Now, if you remember the previous video, I outlined two different ways to agitate. One was, fluid inversions where you're flipping the tank up and down, and the second was rotations. And on the Patterson tanks, you use the agitator stick for that. That is the method that I recommend. So for all three styles here, whether it's constant agitation, intermittent agitation, or minimal agitation, I recommend using the rotation method with the agitator stick and following the amount of time per minute that they want you to do. On the chart here, this is very important. There are three different temperatures that you can process Df96 at. There's 80 degrees, 75 degrees, and 70 degrees. Those are for your normal processing times. Higher temperatures, like 90 degrees, provides a push. 95 provides sometimes a 2-stop push, and 65 you can see is a pull of 1 stop or a half stop, depending on the type of agitation method that I'm doing. So, for instance, I'm out shooting for the day, I've got my film, I come home, and I'm looking for just a fast process of my film so I can see the negatives right away. Well, I can see here that at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, I get a normal negative with 3 minutes of constant agitation. So if I have a fresh batch of the Df96 using constant agitation or rotations for 3 minutes, I'll get a normal negative. I could also do 75 degrees Fahrenheit for normal for 4 minutes using the intermittent agitation style and get a beautiful looking negative. And for 6 minutes, using the minimal agitation method at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, I will get a normal looking negative. There are differences between the three. In my opinion, at the constant agitation, you get a beautiful negative. The grain can be a whisker higher, which in some cases is desirable. It also has a little more snap to it. The shadows are a little thinner, just a whisker, but not much. But it produces a very beautiful negative. Where on the other end of the spectrum, when you go to the minimal, the difference is the negative is maybe a little smoother. The grain is a little rounder. It's not quite as sharp. It's very beautiful, though. It has slightly better shadow detail, a little more compensation in the highlights. But the differences between the 80 and the 70 are subtle, but they're there. And as you process film, you'll start to discover which way you like. One thing that I did discover is that when I push film, for instance, if I'm shooting like P3200 speed by Kodak, or if I'm pushing Cinestill BWXX, which is the Kodak 5222 film, and I want to push it to like 800, I actually like pushing film the best at the minimal agitation procedure. I find that it just has better contrast control, and the grain is just a little bit more controlled. It's subtle, and once again, it's extremely subtle, but I can see it, and that's sort of my preference. Normally, though, I use the middle development temperature and agitation time, the 75 degrees, for all films, because I find that it sort of hits the sweet spot. One thing you need to be careful of if you decide to use the 80-degree technique is that you don't go over 82 degrees. The reason for that is the moment you go over like 82, 83 degrees, the grain actually starts to increase just a little bit. But it's noticeable. And that's why when you're doing a 90-degree push on the constant agitation, you actually get a negative that has a fair amount of grain, but it's very sharp and has a lot of pop. So if you think about this chart, it allows you to dial in the way you want your film to look. You know, once again, I said 75 degrees, 4 minutes is my normal. But if I'm outside shooting on a really overcast day that's kind of flat, I may process it at 80 degrees normal just to give it a little more punch. If I'm out shooting on a day of really high contrast, I may do it for the 6 minutes normal because it's a little better shadows, a little more contrast control, and that'll help me in that situation. So my normal development changes roll to roll based upon the type of light that I'm shooting in. Now, you don't need to go to this level, to this extreme. You could just pretty much settle on the center, but I figure why not? I have the ability with this developer to do that, and it allows me just to realize a little bit better negatives. Additionally, as I said, if you're going to push a film, and you can see in the chart here, I really like the push at the minimal setting because it seems to sort of provide a little bit better looking grain and a little bit better contrast control. Now, if you remember I recorded the video yesterday. If you remember in the video where I talked about how you could mix multiple films together at the same time and process it, this is true. But there are certain films that require a longer processing time. And they're listed here on the sheet. So one of them is right here, T-Max 100. See Kodak T-Max 100, the third one down. And see how it says 2x min? And right here it says 2x min for T-Max 400. What that means is if your processing time is 3 minutes, let's say at 80 degrees Fahrenheit for T-Max 400, you need to double that time. So instead of doing 3 minutes, you would do 6 minutes. This really doesn't have much to do with developing the film as much as it has to do with fixing the film and clearing the super heavy anti-halation coating that certain films have. So T-Max 100, T-Max 400, whatever time you choose, you have to double it. Delta 100 requires a doubling, Delta 400 requires a doubling. Basically, it's the tabular grain films that are going to require this doubling. And the Berger Panchro film, interesting enough, requires a tripling of the time in order to have a properly developed negative. But as long as you follow that rule, the film T-Max looks absolutely phenomenal in this developer. Another thing to note is that you can still mix and match films though. So let's say you've got a roll of T-Max 100 and you've got a roll of Ilford FP4. Well, the FP4 does not require a doubling of time, but T-Max 100 does. That's fine. All you're doing is fixing the FP4 for a longer period of time. The development is still going to be the same. It's just getting a longer fix, and in no way, shape, or form is that going to hurt the film. So you can still mix the films. Just remember that if you're using a T-grain type film, that film is the time that the development is going to be based upon. So once again, if you were doing the 3-minute constant agitation at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, instead of being 3 minutes, it would be 6 minutes. The intermittent wouldn't be 4 minutes, it would be 8 minutes. And also remember that for every roll of film you process after the first batch, you have to add 15 seconds of development time. So let's play this out once. Let's say you're shooting 75, or you're processing at 75 degrees Fahrenheit, normal development, intermittent. So you're in the middle one right here. And you're just going to be processing, let's just choose from this list here, Tri-X. So you get an ISO of 400. It doesn't have a doubling of time. So ISO 400, you get it normal 75 degrees at 4 minutes. But let's say you've already done 2 rolls of film, and this is your third roll of film. Well, each roll of film, you have to add 15 seconds for. So 15 times 2 is 30. So instead of being intermittent agitation for 4 minutes, it would be intermittent agitation for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Does that make sense? So also, let's say you've already done 4 rolls of film, and now you were going to do your 5th. Well, you start at 4 minutes. 4 rolls is an extra minute at 15 seconds per roll. So at 75 degrees normal would now be a 5-minute normal development. Now, if you extrapolate that and use it for the T-grain films, here's where it gets a little bit longer. So T-Max 100 has an extra 2 minutes. So right off the bat, intermittent agitation at normal isn't 4 minutes, it's 8 minutes. So you've automatically got a longer development time right off the bat. And then you also have to add in, have you done any additional rolls of film? So you're starting at 8 minutes, and if you've already processed 2 rolls of film, for instance, now you've got to add another 30 seconds. Now you're at 8 minutes and 30 seconds. So it's important to use this chart to help dial in, the proper development time. And I've looked at the vast majority of films on this chart and followed the directions and followed the suggested times, and have always had a really great negative. The one thing I will say, though, is some of the T-Max films, in particular T-Max 100, has just a wicked heavy pink anti-halation coating. And so if you're at 8 minutes and you still see a little bit of pink, which you might in the film, don't worry about going to 9 minutes or 10 minutes. That's okay. That additional time is just helping clear the film. Sometimes if I'm feeling lazy, I'll use an actually clearing agent, like say Permawash, and I'll take those films and run them through Permawash for a second. This is not only a problem with this particular monobath developer. There are a lot of developers that have a really hard time clearing the anti-halation coating on T-Max films. So you can just process it for a little longer if you see it. And if you're scanning, that little bit of orange or pink that you see, the pink isn't going to affect your scans at all. It would only be a little bit of an issue for certain darkroom processes, but for wet darkroom processes, for scanning, it'd be absolutely perfect. So once again, follow these instructions, read these instructions several times through, and keep this chart here as reference to help you pick out the proper exposure index for your film, and then use this chart here to determine the way you want to process your film.